listening to She Rises, a podcast dedicated to women who are ready to stop settling and start living their lives by design. If you're ready to talk about the stuff that weighs you down and get practical advice on everything from your health, body image, spirituality, relationships, and personal growth, then you're in the right place. Hello, I'm Giovanna Capozza, your host, master coach, spiritual teacher, and mind-body expert, and I'm on a mission to unsettle women all over the world. Are you ready to rise? Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of She Rises. I'm your host, Giovanna Capozza, and I'm here today with a special episode from yours truly. This is another episode that I recorded originally as a GTV episode, and that's on my Instagram channel, which is the IGTV channel that is new to Instagram. If you guys haven't followed me yet on Instagram, please find me there and follow me. It's she_rises_podcast. That's where you'll find me, all my posts and updates, and of course on Facebook. So back to today's episode. I was going to call today's episode Responsibility or Blame. And the reason I was going to call it that is because the idea of taking radical responsibility for everything in your life can be really scary for some people. In fact, when I first heard the concept, I thought of responsibility being the same as blame. And a lot of people do confuse that. Well, if I take responsibility for this, does that mean I am taking the blame? And short answer, no, it doesn't. But it does mean that you're taking responsibility for your experience. So without giving too much away, today's episode is going to be about having that discussion about what exactly radical responsibility is, how to take it, what that will do for you in your life, what that will mean, and what possibilities that will open up for you in your life. And to be really honest, guys, radical responsibility equals radical change, and change in a way that's challenging. And of course, it's not easy to look at oneself in with such a high level of awareness and under such a lens. But it's so rewarding because the radical change that comes is that you are fully empowered in your sovereignty as a being. You are no longer living in victim, and therefore you can be successful in all areas of life. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, we can continue the conversation after the show in the show notes or on the Facebook page at She Rises Podcast. And I really hope you guys enjoy today's show. How can radical responsibility change your life? That's the topic for today. And so radical responsibility to me, well, first I want to backtrack, because when I first started talking about responsibility with people, actually I had someone talk about it with me, about taking responsibility. In the early days, when I would hear this word, I would translate it in my brain to taking the blame. Right? Like if I was taking responsibility for something, it meant that I was taking the blame for it, or that I was somehow, letting someone off the hook and taking it all upon me. So I had this really skewed perception and view of what responsibility meant. And then as I progressed through my journey and I started to understand what my early mentors had been trying to drill into my head since I was 19 about this nature of creating your own reality. And I want to stop there for a minute and talk about the nature of creating your own reality. There's this old New Age concept, which kind of sounds funny, old New Age, but it's this old New Age concept where we've taken this notion of creating your own reality and we've turned it into this other way that we can blame ourselves and make ourselves guilty. So, oh my God, I manifested a disease. That must mean I'm not creating well, and I manifested this, and smack me on the head and blah blah blah. And I call that New Age guilt, and it's just as toxic as any other old form of guilt that there might be out there. So this notion of you create your own reality is real in that everybody's walking around with a filter. Everybody's walking around with a filter, and we create from our perception. And what that means is that if you have a filter that tells you everybody's out to get you, don't trust anyone, people can't be trusted, then you will create the reality of that, because if you're seeing through that filter, that's all you see.
And the way that I explain it to my clients is I say to them, you imagine you have a pure white light and it's a lamp and you've got a white lampshade on it and it's emitting white light because the lampshade is white and the light is white and therefore white light comes out of it. But if you take a blue scarf, a nice sheer silky blue scarf, and you put it on top of the lampshade, what color's the light? It turns blue. And that's exactly what happens with our perception, is when we have a filter over it, we create our reality, or rather we experience our reality from that filter. So I wanted to really be clear on that, because when we talk about radical responsibility and we bring in the you create your own reality stuff, sometimes people get knocked into those old new age concepts. And again, I want to stress, you create your own reality as a statement and as a truth, as a universal truth, does not mean that this is another way that you can bash yourself on the head and go, oh, you know, I must have a filter of people are out to get me because someone just stole my car. Someone stole your car. Great. Deal with that. And then if this keeps happening to you, yeah, maybe you have to address the filter. But again, this is not a place for you to blame or shame yourself. So I wanted to be clear about that before we start. So you create your own reality dovetails into this concept of radical responsibility. And remember before what I said when I first started hearing responsibility and taking responsibility, it felt heavy to me. Somehow, again, it felt like blame, or it felt like I did something wrong. And as I started to learn and grow, I started to realize that taking responsibility is the only place, and taking, 100% responsibility is the only place that I and you and we all can sit in our power. I'll say that again. Taking 100% responsibility for your experience is the only way that you can sit in the seat of your own power. Women, men, whoever's listening, I'm talking to all of you. I specifically coach women one-on-one and in groups, so I'm going to speak to my women right now. If you're desiring to feel powerful, if you're desiring to feel sovereign within yourself, if you're desiring to be able to connect to someone in a relationship and not lose yourself, to be able to run your business in a way that feels congruent with your soul and your purpose, radical responsibility is going to be one of your number one gifts and tools. So radical responsibility can give you three different things. And so what I mean by, before I go into the three things, radical responsibility, the definition of that is that you take 100% responsibility for your experience in every moment. Not that you take away what someone has, quote unquote, done to you, right? This isn't about condoning someone doing something wrong or condoning someone that has hurt you in some way. Again, this dovetails also into real true forgiveness, which is a whole other topic. We'll get into that another time. But this isn't about condoning. Taking responsibility for your experience means that you start to look at your perceptions, your filters, and the place where maybe unconsciously there was something going on and you created this particular situation to teach you something. Maybe unconsciously something was going on when this person said that thing to you, and that's what had you react. And then a whole argument started and there was a whole misunderstanding and all this thing blew up, right? So that's what I mean about taking 100% radical responsibility for your experience. Again, if something horrible happened to you, this doesn't mean that you're responsible for, heaven forbid, being raped or something horrible happening. But what this means is that you take responsibility for how you are going to experience the event and your life. Okay? And if there's any questions, by the way, feel free to type them in. I'm going to be checking Facebook and I'm going to be checking Instagram. So 3 things with radical responsibility. So radical responsibility will give you these 3 things, and I guarantee you they will change your life and they will completely empower you. And I'm looking over at my notes here because I was a good girl and I made notes. I see Rachel's on the line. She'll be really proud of me. So number 1, Radical responsibility will work for you in your life to change your life because it will take you out of out of effect. So when we're approaching our life out of effect instead of cause, right? It means we're coming to life as a victim. We're coming to life like, here's little old me, and here's all of life and all the people in life and everything around me and in my business and in my relationship, and they're all being done to me, right? You guys have all heard that expression around, it's not happening to you, it's happening for you. This is kind of in that neighborhood, right? When you live your life at effect, it means you're at effect of everything around you. Some idiot says something on Twitter, or someone badmouths you, or your friend says something and pisses you off, or doesn't call you back, or whatever it is. And when you're at that effect, it means that you're just like getting hit by all these different things. And you're the victim. You live as the victim. Now, if you sprinkled a little radical responsibility in there, that's where you can step back. So radical responsibility says, well, wait a second. If I have to take, this is 100 and 100, right? So the other person takes 100% radical responsibility and you take 100% radical responsibility. And you say, well, if I'm taking responsibility here, what part did I have to play in this? And if it was, heaven forbid, something that was done, literally you're the victim of a crime, then you're not blaming yourself for that again. But then you start to look at, well, how am I now behaving as a result of? Am I getting angry? Am I getting resentful? Am I bad-mouthing this person? Am I constantly talking about it? Am I feeling like a victim here? Or am I stepping into healing? Am I getting the help that I need? Am I looking at this relationship from a place where I can look at where I was responsible? So again, taking radical responsibility puts you in the driver's seat of your power because you no longer have to come to the world as being affected upon. Now you can come from cause. Now you can look at, where is my power in this situation? Okay, so I hope that one kind of made sense. We weaved in a little bit of stuff. The second one is it empowers you to make the next right choice. So think of it this way. If, like example one, you are living at effect, meaning you're living as the victim, you feel completely disempowered to make the next right choice because what you're doing is waiting for all the external circumstances to change before you can make the right decision. Or you're waiting, I have to wait for this to happen in order for me to do this, or I have to, my classic one is, I got to lose 20 pounds before I can start dating, or I got to, all these crazy things, right? Like I have to get that degree before I can say that I'm smart enough to do that, or I have to reach this amount of money in my business to finally say I'm successful. So we're waiting for all of these external things. So when you take radical responsibility and when you put yourself in the driver's seat of your own life, what you do is you empower yourself to make the next right decision because you're not waiting for all of these external things that are happening behind the scenes. Okay, so that's number two. And number three is, and this is the one request that I hear most from the women I work with, is that they have this deep, deep desire, and I know this personally, to be able to trust themselves implicitly. Just trust their intuition, trust their knowing, to be able to sit in that place of being and know what the next right move is for them. And radical responsibility, so taking 100% responsibility for your experience in your life, will start to develop this self-trust like nobody's business. And I'll tell you why. Because when you're empowered to make the next right decision, because when you're not a victim anymore, and you're not at effect, and you're at cause in your life, you develop an internal sense of trust and knowingness that is really unshakable. Really, really, truly unshakable. So think about that. If you're not waiting for external circumstances to change before you can make the right decision, or before you can feel better about yourself, or before you could start to do the thing, or take the vacation, or make the next move in your business, or whatever it might be, if you're not doing that, then you are, again, like I said, in the driver's seat of your life. And the self-trust that comes along with that Mwah. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's an amazing feeling. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening, those are the three things. I'm going to read them again. So, taking you out of a victim is the number one benefit to taking radical responsibility in your life. Number two is empowering you to make the next right move, whatever that might be for you. And number three is that it increases your ability to trust yourself and your decision-making in all areas of your life. So how do you do this freaking thing of taking responsibility? Like, God, like these benefits sound great. Sign me up. I love it. Well, how do I do it? Because it sounds like it's hard. Sometimes it can be hard because not sometimes, all the time, it requires taking a really, really hard look at yourself. And usually at the shadow side, right? The unconscious part of us, the unconscious machinations of our craziness, right? It requires taking a look at that. And I'll tell you how to diagnose if you are not taking responsibility and your life's kind of spinning and you're not feeling really empowered. So kind of gave it away a little bit there. So one of the ways is that you feel totally disempowered in your life, in your business. You're just kind of like, I don't know where the next thing's coming from, and I don't know what I'm doing next, or, I don't know what's happening with, my husband, or your relationships are kind of blowing up. And that's a place where it might be a little red flag for you to sit down and say, okay, what's going on inside of me? What do I need to take responsibility for here to radically shift how I'm experiencing this situation, right? It might be something simple like you have a negative filter and you always look at the worst case scenario. And maybe that comes from a place of you trying to protect yourself. Usually it does. And you acknowledging that, you seeing that, and you working through that is taking radical responsibility, because then you can approach your life and your relationships and your business in a whole complete new way because you're wearing a new filter, you have a new lens on. Another way to start taking radical responsibility is to get some help, right? So you might have to talk to a really great objective friend. I have friends who I can call and say, okay, this shit's going down with so-and-so, and like, I need to know, am I the a-hole here, or like, what's going on? Like, what do I need to take responsibility for? And I have friends who could actually say, well, you do this thing sometimes, and then, ouch, it hurts, but I need that. We all need that. I have a coach who I can go to and say that, and say, where's my piece in this? Because I have a blind spot. I can't see it. And that's how we start to slowly take radical responsibility for our lives. So, last little piece, and this is just a caution for those of you empaths out there, for those of you people that slide into the little bit of codependence, guilty, you can overly take responsibility. And what I mean by that is you can go into the toxic side of radical responsibility, which is, I feel bad. I should be this, or I should be doing that in my business, or I should make that phone call, or I should. And you get into this, one of my mentors calls a rescuing mentality, and I get slapped over the wrists a lot about not rescuing. But this is actually another way that we can misinterpret radical responsibility, which is actually powerful. And that we can get over responsible. And that is driven by guilt, it's driven by shame, and it's driven by codependence. So watch yourself when you're taking responsibility and make sure that the word should is not getting in there. Because if the word should's getting in there and there's shame coming in, you're not really in radical responsibility. Now you've, jumped over the cliff into codependence land, and it's actually detrimental to you. Then you start to take on everything as if it was your responsibility. And that's also not healthy. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. Again, it was a quick one today, and it was earlier than usual because, again, I am flying off to the land down under in a few hours. and I'll be away for a couple of weeks. And so the next time you see me, I will be in Australia giving you the next one in a couple weeks' time. So I hope this was helpful for you. Again, tune in here. It is weekly, but there's 2 weeks off this particular week, and we will be back in a couple of weeks with another episode for you. And if you're not following us on Instagram, you can follow us on Instagram. And for Instagrammers that are following, you can follow us on Facebook, where we do the Facebook Live, and I try and simulcast. I don't know who we is. I keep saying we. It's I who will simulcast every week. And if you haven't tuned in to She Rises, the podcast, go to iTunes or Google Play Music and search for She Rises and subscribe. Become a listener. Give us a rate and review if you're up to it, or a star rating, and tell us how you love the episodes. And listen along, share it with your friends. Thanks, guys, for listening, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and keep rising, everyone. For books and resources related to today's episode, make sure you head over to SheRisesPodcast.com, and I'll see you there. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you tune back in next week when I dive into more juicy topics to help make your life the best it can be. And hey, if you've enjoyed listening to the show and you love it, head on over to iTunes and leave me a rate and review, and subscribe there to the show.